We'll see. Okay, that's a good question. It's a good observation. We are using x without a known initial value. Okay, but it does not need one to begin with. I'm hoping my compact flashcard will hold out just fine, at least until the end of this class.
Why did you pass it over, Megan?
Well, these things are insensitive to magnetic fields. I mean, they're not magnetic devices.
What size is yours?
It's a 16 gig.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Where's my hobby?
I don't need all 16 gig. There are two things I don't like about this compact flash card. One, the speed is not quite as advertised. It advertises itself as a 25 megabytes per second transfer, but that's only for read. Yeah. For writing, it's down to like 10. And two, it doesn't seem to be very reliable. I'm getting disk corruption problems, constantly now. So I have to look into that. Okay, we have comments, we have line number, and that's it initially. The precondition, there's nothing to say about the precondition because we don't have a single global variable anymore, which is good. Now we go to line 18. Okay, line 18 is just really, it's not really that useful because all it does is to invoke the subroutine main, but this is consistent with what a C program does, so I have to do it that way. Then we continue execution inside the main subroutine, which is line 14. Line 14 is invoking factorial, so we need to allocate another column for the return line number. This time the invocation is on line 14, which means when we are done, we return to line 15. And then we have to set up the parameters. There are two parameters each to set up. One is n and one is r. We use the constant 3 or the expression 3 to specify n, and therefore start with an initial value of 3. A pass-by value parameter behaves pretty much like a local variable, except its initial value is specified by the invoke statement. Parameter r is passed by reference, and I use variable x inside the main to specify parameter r. I forgot that one thing, didn't I? I forgot to allocate for variable x when I invoke main. So variable x is in column D, and as a result, R is an alias of column D. Are we doing okay so far? Do you guys realize, what I missed? Yep.
So the post and the return line and the allocation of the variable has to be on the same line. Same
Yes.
row.
Yep. Because both of these are on a per invocation basis, not a per subroutine basis. Okay, every time you invoke, you have to allocate for the return line number, the local variables, as well as all the parameters. Okay. Are we doing okay so far after the execution of line 14? We continue execution inside the subroutine called factorial, which starts with line 4. Line 4 asks a question. Is n less than or equal to 1? N is column F. It has a value of 3. 3 is less than or equal to 1 is false. That means we have to go to the else branch starting on line 7. Line 7 says we have to invoke the subroutine again. So once again, we have to set up the return line number, parameter n, and parameter r. The return line number is easy to figure out because the invocation is on line 7, which means when we are done with the invocation, we continue on to line 8. The return line number is line 8. Are we doing okay so far? Now, this part gets a little bit more complicated. What do we use to specify for this n or column I? It seems kind of confusing because we specify n on both sides of the right arrow. If you look at this thing here, on the left-hand side we specify n minus 1. On the right-hand side we specify n. So now you have to figure out what is the purpose of each side of the arrow? What is this n here? What is the n on the right-hand side of the right arrow? What am I trying to specify here?
N minus 1, you try and transfer over to n.
This is the parameter that I'm setting up. Okay? In other words, the n on the right-hand side refers to column I. Is that okay? That's the new one. That's the n that I'm setting up. The n of the n minus 1 on the left-hand side refers to the n that I already know, which is referring to which column?
Yeah.
Column F. Okay? So now we have on the left-hand side, this n is referring to column F, which has a value of 3. 3 minus 1 is 2, and as a result, the new column that I'm setting up for column I now has a value of 2. Is that okay? I mean, this part can be confusing. Yep.
Why earlier in an all-use example you had an assignment of the variable on the left-hand side, and this time you're doing it
Because
on the
it is
right?
not a variable.
Okay.
Because n is not a variable. N is a parameter. Okay? And that's why I kind of intentionally put it on the other side, because it is not a variable, it is a parameter. Okay? And in a real programming language, you don't even spell it out. All you do is to specify n minus 1, and because it is the first parameter, it is implicitly going to parameter n. Are we doing okay so far with why column I ends up with a value of 2? Really? Okay. What do I put into column J or parameter R? What do I use to specify R? I use R to specify R, which sounds really confusing as well. But then you have to think about which R are we talking about on each side of the double-sided arrow. Once again, the one on the right-hand side specifies the parameter that I'm setting up. In other words, the right-hand side of the double-sided arrow is specifying column J. That means the left-hand side of the double-sided arrow refers to the R that I already know, which is column G.
So AKA column G.
It is AKA column D.
G.
AKA column D.
Column D.
Oh, okay.
Are we doing okay with this part? Why is it not a reference to a reference?
Because you want to use the most efficient.
Exactly. We are only... Exactly. We want every single one to point directly to the original column. We don't want to have to go through, this is a reference to this one is a reference to that one. Because this is exactly what is going on when you execute a C program. That's exactly how it does things. Are we doing okay so far? Okay. And now we move on to line 4 again, because every time you invoke a subroutine, we start execution from the beginning. Line 4 this time is still evaluating n is less than or equal to 1. It's still false because n equals to 2 at this point. And then we move on to line 7 as a result. And line 7 is invoking the subroutine again. Okay? But you guys already know the pattern this time, right? I mean, we have to set up 3 things. We have to set up the return line number, n as well as r. Return line number is 8 because we are on line 7. N becomes 1 this time because this n is 2. 2 minus 1 is 1, and that's why this n gets 1. And r is also AKA column D because we are passing the same reference along, just like that. Are we doing okay so far? Other than the spreadsheet being kind of wide and difficult to read at this point? Now, I have a way to make it less difficult to read. I can always use this mechanism here, and also use this mechanism here. So this way I can scroll one pane without changing the other one. Do you guys see what I just did? Okay.
How did you do that again? What was the command?
There's a bar. Okay. There's a bar. You can pull from both the top and also from the right-hand side. See this bar here?
Yeah.
If you pull this one down, it will separate this window into two halves. Each one is, they are lockstep as far as the horizontal scroll bar is concerned, but each one gets its own vertical scroll bar. Now there's a bar here. If you pull this one over, this one will basically separate it kind of horizontally into two parts, so that this scroll bar controls, the horizontal movement of this portion, and then this scroll bar controls the other portion. So now I am looking still at the same spreadsheet, but I have 4 portions to look at the same time. It just makes navigation easier when you're dealing with a big spreadsheet and your screen size is limited. When you guys do homework assignments, you typically won't run into this problem because you can run your monitor at its native resolution, which is typically at least 14,000 pixels, 1,400 pixels by 700 or 800 pixels. So that 14,000 pixels would be nice. But I'm running a much lower resolution, and I'm also zooming in a little bit. That's why I run out of space a lot faster than you would, when you do your homework assignment. Okay, so this time, we will get into the subroutine starting on line 4 again, but this time n is 1. 1 is less than or equal to 1 is true. That means we don't go to line 7 anymore. We go to line 5 instead. What does line 5 do? Line 5 says, I want R to get a value of 1. But what exactly is R? R is an alias of column D, which means I go all the way to column D, and I say, oh, column D, you're getting a value now. You're getting a value of 1. Are we doing okay so far with this one? That kind of answers the question of why we can have x with an uninitialized value. Okay, very good. Okay, so we can hide this part again. So that's what line 5 does. And after line 5, we get out of the conditional statement, and we get to line 10, which is the end of the subroutine. There's not much to do at the end of the subroutine. We say that we have to continue execution on line 8 because return line number tells me we have to continue on line 8. So we put a line 8 here. After we utilize that information, we say, oh, okay, whatever we allocated for this invocation, we don't need that anymore. So these 3 columns are all deallocated at this point. Are we doing okay? Kind of? Okay. So I scroll my screen a little bit. On line 8, what do we do? On line 8, we have to compute the product of R and N, and then use it to update R again. Again, what is R? R is column D. So let's take a look at column D. Column D has a value of 1 at this point. N has a value of 2. 1 times 2 is 2. And then we update column D again with a value of 2. Yep.
Why did we skip line 4?
We did not skip line 4.
We didn't reevaluate it.
Why do we want to reevaluate line 4? The return line number told me to go back to line 8, and I just blindly follow and go back to line 8. So that's important. I'm kind of glad you asked the question because you were asking that question based on what you think the subroutine should do. But it is important to remember we just follow what we wrote down earlier. Okay? Because when we invoke the subroutine, we have already gone past line 4. And line 4 is a conditional statement. We don't go back to the beginning of a conditional statement. So that's why, when I'm done with the last invocation of factorial, I just look up the return line number. It tells me I should go back to line 8. I just go back to line 8. Okay? Okay, line 8 is all done. It is the last thing we want to do in the else branch. We get out of the conditional statement. We continue on with line 10 now. Line 10 is the end of the subroutine, which means we have to look up the return line number. Remember, we're supposed to go back to line 8 because of that. And then we say we don't need these